Welcome to the Tom Lovett podcast. I'm Tom Lovett, author of Words Unspoken, The Science, Experience, and Treatment of Stuttering. In this video, we're going to talk about one of the most interesting studies from the book, a 2008 paper titled An Experimental Clinical Trial of a Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Package for Chronic Stuttering. It was led by Ross Menzies. And this study is important because it shows us how much improved fluency by itself will affect agency and quality of life. And it also gives us tools for how to improve mental health and increase our ability to speak up even without any changes to fluency. So, like many other studies covered in the book, this was a study of intensive speech therapy program. They modified therapy program to remove all elements of behavioral change and real-world application. So the program itself was just speech motor correction. They also took behavioral metrics, mental health, quality of life, agency. They took those metrics before speech therapy, after speech therapy, and then again a 1-year follow-up. They screened for social anxiety. They used what's called global assessment of functioning, a psychological assessment of like quality of life, how good you feel. They also had this challenge list. So each participant made a list of 10 difficult speaking situations and then marked which ones they felt capable of doing. And that's a very important part we'll keep coming back to. That's a tool for measuring how willing you are to take on a challenging speaking situation where you may be worried about stuttering. The first cohort in this study, the control group, did only the intensive speech therapy program. Their fluency improved at the rates you would expect of a normal speech therapy program, one that also includes behavioral change and real-world application. There were slight improvements in mental health. Their global assessment of functioning went up, and there were minor improvements in other areas. On the challenge list, before speech therapy began, these participants were willing to do 45% of their challenge items. That went up to 59% after speech therapy, and then went up to 63% at 1-year follow-up. So a cumulative shift from 45% to 63% of their challenge items. Social anxiety was also measured. That was half of the participants had social anxiety at intake and half had social anxiety afterwards. So no change in social anxiety diagnoses. So what this cohort tells us is that limited speech therapy program still improves fluency. Speech motor correction will improve your fluency if practiced intensively. That's irrespective of whether you practice putting it into real-world application or you change your thoughts or feelings. These programs will make you speak more fluently. But at the same time, it also shows that this improved fluency only has minor beneficial effects on your well-being and your ability or willingness to speak up despite your fear of stuttering and social reactions to your stutter. The other cohort in the group, the CBT cohort, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, they did 10 weekly sessions of CBT before starting speech therapy. The difference between the measurement prior to CBT and after was massive. Like gains like that surpassed what the control cohort showed even after 1-year follow-up. The CBT cohort was willing to do 30% of their challenge items when the study started. After CBT, they were willing to do 90%. That's a massive improvement. The control group went from 45% to 63% at 1-year follow-up. So the CBT cohort started behind the control group, but then blew past them with no changes to fluency. That's huge news. And with their other behavioral metrics, you'll see they also improved dramatically simply from CBT. Basically, like every chart in the study, if you read the paper, you'll see there's a huge difference between the first measurement prior to cognitive behavioral therapy and then the measurement immediately following that, before speech therapy even started. Just across the board, it's like decreases in bad stuff and increases in good stuff. So if your priority for managing your stutter is well-being and agency, and fluency is not that important to you, doing CBT or other forms of therapy will be more effective for you than simply the CBT cohort then did the intensive speech therapy program, and they saw the same gains in fluency as the control group. So that tells us that intensive speech therapy improves fluency regardless of your mental health or your well-being or your sense of agency as you go through the program. I actually suspect, based on the structure of the study, the authors expected or hypothesized that CBT, being in a better mental state, would improve the effectiveness of speech therapy. But like we see in pretty much every study of intensive speech therapy, participants finish speaking at about 2% stuttered syllables every time. And that's what we saw in this study. The CBT group's behavioral metrics also showed improvement after speech therapy. After speech therapy, nearly every participant CBT cohort was willing to do every item on their challenge list. That number got even closer to 100% of like all participants doing all items at 1 year follow-up. As the authors wrote, there was a bit of like a ceiling effect on this because participants ran out of challenging things to do. And compare that to the control group, who went from 45% of their items at the beginning to 63% at the end. Whereas the CBT cohorts, like literally off the charts, needed more challenging things. They were just levels above the control group in terms of willingness to do difficult speaking situations. When it comes to social anxiety, remember that the control group started at a diagnosis rate of 50% before speech therapy and then was diagnosed again with 50% of the participants having social anxiety after the program. The CBT cohort also started with half of the participants being diagnosed with social anxiety, but after speech therapy or at follow-up, 0 of them were diagnosed with social anxiety. So they went from half to 0, which is huge. And this is very important in stuttering because, as we discuss in the book and in other videos, social anxiety is very prevalent in stutterers. The general rates of social anxiety in the general population is 4%. That number for stutterers is 40%. So 10 times the rate of social anxiety. This part of the study tells us that cognitive behavioral therapy is very effective for social anxiety for a population of people who are more likely to suffer from social anxiety than the average person. So that's a massive tool and a massive gain that we can apply in our lives. The takeaway from this study is that cognitive behavioral therapy is incredibly effective for stutterers. If your priority is agency and well-being, a CBT program will be more effective for you than speech therapy by itself. That said, there's no reason to not improve fluency at the same time as your agency and well-being. So if you did intensive speech therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy at the same time, you would both be speaking more fluently and more often, kind of a double win there. And then there's also successful management, which is both agency and fluency, but it's a different kind of fluency. It's more natural fluency than what you get simply from intensive speech therapy. So I recommend checking out those videos in that chapter in the book. If you're interested in doing cognitive behavioral therapy, the program used in this study was a product developed by the authors specifically for stuttering, and this study showed to be very effective. However, a later study showed that the product that they developed for stuttering was equally as effective as regular cognitive behavioral therapy. So you don't need to use a specific product for stuttering. Do CBT however you like. You could reach out to a therapist and say, I'd like to do cognitive behavioral therapy, and even mention, like, probably during your conversations, a big fear of mine is my stutter and social embarrassment, and that's something I like to work on speaking up more often, even when I'm afraid of stuttering. If you want to do CBT on your own, there's a fantastic book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy by David Burns. It's a very famous book for CBT. It goes over both theory and practice. It has 8,000 reviews on Amazon, so it's very well reviewed, very well respected. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope you feel more optimistic about your agency and your well-being. I hope you feel like you have tools you can use to improve the quality of your life. Thank you for watching the Tom Lovett podcast. I hope you found this video interesting and insightful. If you want to learn more about stuttering, check out some of my other videos or read my book, Words Unspoken, The Science, Experience, and Treatment of Stuttering. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share, and tell your friends. Thanks for watching. Bye.